Welcome to the Farmhouse. I'm Stephanie.
I'm Candace.
And today we will be speaking with Jennifer Anderson. Jennifer is the executive director of Trellis For Tomorrow, which is a nonprofit organization in Chester County, Pennsylvania, and they're dedicated to cultivating a better future through growth, community, and sustainability. Trellis manages about 24 garden sites that have generated over 34,000 pounds of produce last year. The organization also offers youth programs that provide hands-on experience with gardening and other life skills. So we will be getting to Jennifer soon, and she will go into much more detail about all of that. But first, we have a little treat for you, and I think this is one that a lot of our listeners will be very interested in. So Candace, take it away.
Yeah, so on this podcast, we've talked with guests about the difficulties of balancing farm work with caring for your family, especially if you have little ones on the farm. And I think even one of our recent past guests, Annalise Wagner, told us about how when her kids were born, she tried bringing them along for farm chores, but it's hard. I mean, you can only do so much while still keeping an eye on kids. And that goes for whether you are, in the barn or if you're at home just trying to get dinner done. And unfortunately, finding childcare in rural communities is hard. We have a news story on LancasterFarming.com about a recent study from Penn State and Ohio State that found that over 3/4 of the farm families they surveyed said that they had experienced childcare challenges, and those challenges often wind up affecting how farming families run their operations, whether it's postponing investing in improvements or cutting back hours. And these things obviously have a very real impact on the farms and ultimately on the money that farmers are able to earn from their farms. Finding affordable, accessible childcare is difficult for a lot of people, no matter where you live, but it is especially difficult out in rural areas. A lot of these families might have to drive over 30 minutes to even get to a single childcare center, and it's not like they have, a lot to choose from. Because of studies like this, both the Farm Bureau and the National Farmers Union are working to add affordable childcare in rural areas to their priorities for the Farm Bill. So hopefully we'll see some improvements that come from that. I know as a parent, finding affordable, accessible childcare has been an issue at times in my family. Just the other week, we got our, biannual notice that our childcare costs are going up. So it's definitely something that a lot of people out there are facing. And it's nice to hear that, people in rural areas might find some relief from this issue.
Yeah, so this article, this little treat article, will be linked in the show notes at lancasterfarming.com. So check it out. I feel like a lot of our guests really touched on this issue, and I'm sure a lot of you guys also can relate to this issue as well. But now we're going to be welcoming Jennifer into the farmhouse, but this week's episode is going to be a little tiny bit different than usual because as we are speaking right here, right now, recording, Candace is getting ready to head on vacation.
I'm shipping out. So Steph is going to be handling this one on her own, flying solo, but I know she's going to do a great job. I'm sorry I wasn't able to speak with Jennifer, but I can't wait to hear what she has to say when I get back.
And no worries, everyone. Candace will be back for the next episode, unless she just decides to stay on vacation forever. But
I mean, who knows? No, I'll be back. Wild horses couldn't drag me away.
All right, so let's get Jennifer into the farmhouse. Jennifer, welcome to the farmhouse. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
So we will get into the Grow Careers program and the Seed Skills program in a little bit. But first, can you just tell me a little bit about Trellis For Tomorrow as a whole and the work that it's doing?
Yeah, sure. So we are at this point, almost 21-year-old not-for-profit or nonprofit organization. We are based in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. And most of our work focuses on the region, the Phoenixville to Pottstown sort of stretch of area in the Philadelphia region. But we also have, as we'll probably talk about, a Food for All program that spans 5 counties. And our work is really focused on, if you look at our mission statement, we talk about fostering compassion and resilience in individuals and helping them to build sustainable communities, which sometimes people look at and say, well, goodness, how do you do that? That's an unusual mission. Um, but the work that we do is really about helping people to lead and feed themselves. So it's about how we can help communities to be more self-sustainable, particularly around growing food and eating healthy and more nutritiously. But in order to do that, you have to build systems that include people being able to sustain those systems and that type of lifestyle. So that's really, in a nutshell, what Trellis is about, but I think we'll probably get into some more with you about the details of what that really looks like. But in general, growing food and working with young people, and giving the community skills to be more sustainable, I would say, in a nutshell.
I love the phrase you used, to lead and feed themselves. I love that. That's powerful, I think.
Yeah. It does sort of, in a very short soundbite, I think, describe how we look at our work and the way we partner with organizations and individuals in our neighborhoods.
Yeah. So when people first encounter trellis, what are some of the initial preconceptions that they often have, and are you able to then dispel them?
I think mostly because we work in both this sort of youth space and the food space, they come from one angle or the other, Stephanie. So like they either come in thinking, oh, you guys are that program or that organization that, pays youth to work in gardens or places youth in internships or things like that. Or they think you're that organization that does all the gardening. And of course we do both. So depending on the circumstances, we'll either say, yeah, we're all of that, but we also do these things and they're really important, or vice versa. But other than that, I don't think that's the main one. That's the main one that we get.
Gotcha. So let's dive in a little more and tell me about the Seed Skills program. How do kids get involved and how do they benefit?
Yeah. So Seed Skills is, it's really an all year round program, but it predominantly focuses on the summer. So our Seed Skills youth are aged 12 to 18, and they are from 4 different communities, 2 in Pottstown, 1 in Spring City, and 1 in Phoenixville. And they're centered on neighborhoods and communities that have low access to high quality food, particularly fresh fruits and vegetables, and generally are some food insecure families and individuals. And our youth are paid to work in the garden with us. It's a paid work experience. And so we treat it and they treat it like a job. And they come every day and they learn how to plant, how to manage a garden, how to harvest food, but then they also work together to create an enterprise to get that food back into their neighborhood, into their community. So sometimes that is a subscription-based model where they'll go around and they'll get people to sign up. And then they deliver produce to their homes. We also have newly this year produce stands where people can come and pick up at certain days of the week. We also deliver to food banks and food pantries through that program. So there's lots of different ways that the youth develop that enterprise to get the food into the community. There's a leadership track. So we also work with youth to build their career and workforce and kind of life preparedness skills. And they can advance along that leadership track and get more responsibility, a little bit more money. And most of the time that's for youth that are there year over year for a number of years, which is what we're hoping to encourage. And those youth work with us through the spring, sometimes through the fall and the winter, and they actually help design the program and make changes to the program going forward. So that's the Seed Skills program. And that's really been the last 7 years we've had that program, and it was an outgrowth of a prior program called Food for Thought that was similar, but it was based on CSAs and farms outside of the communities. And we sort of flipped the script and said, hey, we're going to bring this back into the community and have it be an asset and a resource for the community where these young people live.
Wow. So I'm assuming for families, not so much this year, it's already August, but for families who are interested, they can get involved through your website, yes. I'm guessing?
Yes, you absolutely can. They can go to our website and there's a contact form for information. And if you go to the programs page and the Seed Skills page, I believe there's a button on there for information about the produce deliveries and subscriptions. And of course, following us on social media helps too.
Oh, of course. And for all of our listeners, we'll make sure to link directly to the Trellis for Tomorrow website in the show notes of this episode, so you can get there very easily. So is it pretty common in the Seed Skills program that this is the kids' first experience with agriculture?
Yes, definitely. I would say that probably almost 100%, unless they have a family garden where their parents or their grandparents often teach them some gardening skills. But in terms of anything on a larger scale, absolutely.
Okay, that's kind of what I figured, but you never want to assume. So what's the typical reaction from when the kids kind of first get their hands into the soil to when they're able to actually like harvest a product at the end?
Yeah, that's such a great question, Stephanie. So it's funny because a lot of young people will come to the program because their friends have told them about it. So one of the main ways that we get young people, this was our first year, by the way, that all 4 of our sites had a wait list for the
Oh,
program.
wow.
So we definitely have a lot of interest and an increasing demand for the program. But still, it's mostly word of mouth. You know, we have some partner organizations that help us to recruit, but at this point, it's pretty much just they've heard about it from somebody, and so they'll come in. And I remember a couple of years ago there was a young person who's now one of our youth leaders who came in and said, I really don't like gardening and I don't really like people, but somehow here it just all works. And so, it is interesting. They come in and there are different reactions. I mean, as you might imagine, some people immediately get excited about getting their hands in the dirt. And, with today's world being so digital for a lot of these young people, right? Everything is on a screen, especially if they're not involved in a sport or something super physical. Everything is really, really, kind of one dimensional, it feels like. So for them, doing something tactile and sensory like that is just really exciting. And then they get to see, something grow and be harvested, and then go to a community member that gets excited about it. So all of those pieces, I think, are really eye-opening for young people and get them engaged. Some of them go through and get very hooked on gardening, and also just interestingly, and maybe not super surprisingly, but on fresh produce and what it's like to have this kind of food in their house. And they may not like everything that they grow, but typically they'll find 1 or 2 things that they get excited about, and they learn. We do cooking demos and things with them. They help prepare their own lunches, stuff like that. So they get engaged in that aspect of it, and it changes how they look at what they eat and their relationship with food. So that's another area that's exciting for them. And then some of them get really, really jazzed about agriculture. We have one young person I can think of right now who just this summer we hired to help us lead some of our gardens that came through the program, and is still actually, I think, maybe only 17, so not even at the tail end of the program, but it was just so engaged and so excited about agriculture that, just sort of went gangbusters when it came to learning and taking on responsibility. So it really runs the gamut. I think one of the more daunting things sometimes, and you can imagine with this summer, with some of those really hot days, the weather is intense for these young people. And, but they do it, they stick it out and they enjoy the camaraderie and, their cohorts a lot. So that helps too, but it's a mixed bag.
Yeah, that is very cool. I mean, I feel like we've talked about this on this podcast a few times between Candace and I and other guests, that when you grow up in an area with that fresh produce, you get so used to it being there that it's sometimes hard to put yourself into the shoes of someone who isn't, doesn't have that privilege to have that fresh local produce all the time. So it's honestly great to hear stories of these kids and getting that experience.
Yeah, that's one of the things that makes me the happiest when I listen to we have a bunch, by the way, if you go to our YouTube page, which is also on our website in the header, you can go there. You can see videos of the kids talking about their experience, and it's really neat. There's one recently that we just did called Roses, Buds, and Thorns, which is an activity that we do at the end of of each day to talk about what went well, what didn't go so well, what are you hoping for kind of in the future, and they're all talking about it, and a number of them talked about the cooking piece of it and the food piece of it, and in our surveys, that is something that we generally score pretty high, and it always makes me feel good when people say, "Oh, I learned how to bring home a zucchini and cook it and make something that I really like." It's like I feel like that is a major, even if they don't garden for the rest of their life, right? If they decide this is not something I want to do, getting my hands in the dirt, just making that shift, I feel like is really significant.
Yeah, especially at a young age. I mean, that's such a,
Mhm.
you're so open at that young age to actually learn and take in new things.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So, what is it about gardening and agriculture that you think lends itself to building leadership and communication skills, specifically in young people?
Yeah, that's another great question. So, um, it's very metaphorical, right? You can look at gardening and you can make ties with that to anything in terms of the systems of growing plants and vegetables and fruits, and just so it creates a lot of opportunities for dialogue around how we care for things, how we care for ourselves, the relationships. Like, one of the big things in our programs is talking about systems. There's not a lot of talk about systems, especially sort of disciplinary systems, if you will, right? So at school, you might go to a science class and you might talk about biology from a very narrow aspect, or certain aspects of psychology or something like that. But we're able to really bring all of these things together, and using agriculture as both a medium for life skills, building life skills. They're literally showing up every day, getting to work. They're hot, they're dirty, they're pushing themselves. They're held to a high standard, all of those things. But then we also can talk about the whole food cycle, right? How do you, when you think about what soil you're actually planting that seed in, and what's in that soil, and how that affects the seed, and then once the plant grows, like how the weather conditions and climate change affect the impact of that plant, right? And then you're harvesting, and where does that go, and how do we decide where it goes? And wow, how can people who don't have a garden like this in front, in their neighborhood, get access to this if there's no grocery store within 3 or 4 miles, and they don't have a car, and there's no public transportation, all of those things, right? So it leads to all of these conversations. And part of what the program is doing is trying to help these young people think about the relationship to the world and broaden the way that maybe they think about their opportunities and what they have the ability to impact around them. So it just works in that way, Steph. It's just like, it really gives you that foothold to be able to jump off of into these multiple different dimensions that we want to bring into the program.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like that's kind of another recurring theme that's come up as we've done these interviews, is how agriculture is connected to every little aspect of your life, and how, right? I mean, you can have so many communication and conversations about really broad topics that all kind of trace back to agriculture. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just very tangible for them too. It's very literal.
yeah.
And then like I said, when you do things like the cooking and even the business model that we're creating, you can start to talk about marketing and communication, and then there's the leadership aspect, where it's like, what kind of standard are we setting? What kind of example are we setting for people? And how do we show up every day? It's just like, it's sort of never ending in terms of the opportunities to use this as a good as good fodder for that kind of discussion.
Yeah. So let's shift a little and talk about the Grow Careers program. So can you tell us more about what that is?
Yeah. So Trellis For Tomorrow, which was actually formerly called Triskelis up until about 2018, was always really focused on youth and youth development. And for a majority of its history, had an internship type of program, or a program where we could help youth get real work experience in other places other than just Trellis and the gardens. So the Grow Careers program is an internship matching program where we place interns, and we get applications from young people who are interested in getting work experience in an internship format. And a lot of them are from these same communities that we have relationships. Some of them are from our Seed Skills youth once they reach that 18-year-old mark and they want to kind of branch out a little bit. And based on their interests and the intake process that we also have a universe of host sites that all are mostly, I would say 90-95% are nonprofit organizations in Phoenixville and Pottstown, sometimes outside of those areas, depending on where the interns are from. But most of them are in Phoenixville and Pottstown. And those are organizations that can use extra help, but don't always have the bandwidth to recruit and navigate all of the ins and outs or even pay for an intern. So the Grow Careers program provides support both to the intern and the host site. So we do a matching process. The intern is able to pick if they get multiple offers, kind of like just a regular job search and selection process. And then they'll work from anywhere from 60 to 160 hours at that site. And during that time, we work with them to create a career plan and career goals, and also provide multiple different professional development workshops around things like resume building and networking and interviewing and so on and so forth, financial literacy. So we're kind of helping them build a bunch of skills while they're actually going through that internship. And we help if there's any conflict or issue between the host site and the intern. We can help with that conflict resolution, sometimes replacement, although that's somewhat unusual, but it happens. So so that program is sort of like the stepping stone off of the Seed Skills program into this next place. And it is sometimes with Trellis. We had an intern this summer who was purely ag that came through the Grow Careers program that had come from somewhere else, but had come into Trellis and was really interested in the agricultural side of things. So she did a lot of work in our greenhouse, in our agricultural learning center in Pottstown, and some other things. But oftentimes it's completely unrelated, and just with different kinds of organizations that might connect to their interest area.
Wow, that's very cool. I feel like at that age, it's so hard to actually get those skills, like interview skills and resume building. Like that's such a vital thing to have, and it's sometimes hard to learn. So that's awesome.
Yes. Yeah. And that's also, I don't know if I said it, Stephanie, but that's also a paid program. Mm-hmm. So the funds that we raise for all of these programs is really important to us, that we pay all of our youth. The Seed Skills program is an educational grant, kind of like a stipend. The Grow Careers program, they're actually on our payroll and paid as a regular employee. So it's very important, because otherwise they may select an opportunity just for the paycheck and not have the ability to get all of this additional support and services that we can provide.
Let's talk about the Food for All program and the process of creating and running those gardens.
Yeah, so Food for All program, I think, at least in my travels, is pretty unique and very interesting. So through that program, we are partnering with, I think at this point, about 27 other sites within 5 counties, and they're organizational sites. They could be faith-based institutions, academic institutions, municipal or corporate. And it's organizations that have land around their buildings that they typically own, not always, but typically. They have an interest in some sort of service back to the community. They have a constituent group, right? So whether that's employees or members or parishioners or whatever it is, that has some bandwidth to help support growing food. And they contract with Trellis to build a garden. Usually, sometimes it's a garden that's existing that we rebuild, but usually it's a new installation, and we'll design it with them and figure out what they want. We'll build the garden for them, but with their volunteer support. And then we are basically their educational backbone, as well as we provide all of the seedlings. So we grow about 100,000 seedlings a year in our greenhouse at Lawndale Farm. They're all organic, not certified organic, but they are all chemical free, and they're grown organically and using sustainable practices. And then we provide all of that material as well as, soil amendments, other things that those sites need to manage their garden 3 seasons a year. And we then connect them with food banks and food pantries that are in the area. So the agreement in the Food for All program is that they will donate 50%, at least 50% of their harvest to area food banks and food pantries. Most of the time, it's between 95 and 98% that they actually donate. So on a typical year, it does vary some because of a whole host of reasons, but anywhere from about 35 to 45,000 pounds of organic produce gets donated every year through that program to area food banks and food pantries. So we're talking, if we have a little formula that we use, but it's about 120,000 meals, or to 150,000 meals, depending on the pounds of produce that's donated through that program. And it's really exciting because certainly there are people that engage at those. There's in terms of volunteers, and again, it fluctuates. And COVID obviously had a significant impact, especially on the corporate sites. But there's between 500 and 1,000 people involved in that program over the course of a year from all of those different sites. So a lot of people learning these skills, and we also talk with them about food system sustainability, about food insecurity, food deserts, things like that in their area. So they begin to understand that even though they may live in a wealthy area, it doesn't mean that they necessarily that all of the people in that area have access to that and have what they need, and why this is important. So that is a really big part of it. There's also a big part of that program that is community building. When you have, and again, these are kind of all different types of gardens, but when you have groups of people coming together and meeting in the garden, not unlike the young people, it's an equalizer, right? Everybody's excited about being there, usually. And they're getting their hands in the dirt. It's very tactile, it's very grounding, and then they can talk with each other about a common interest or whatever over a garden bed. It just has that sort of enjoyable feel. They're getting fresh air, they're outside, like it's just a nice place to spend time with other people and get to know them. So there's a community building. And also for, again, like the corporate organizations in particular, there's like an employee engagement aspect of that too, where this is their one of the ways that they give back to the community. And so it gets people excited about where they go to work and what they're doing there. So there's a lot of benefits to that program, but I think it's fairly unique. I haven't seen it or in that same iteration in other places, and it's really effective.
Yeah, I mean, that's a kind of crazy amount of food that's been produced through that program, which is awesome.
Yeah. We're over 1 million meals at this point since inception. Wow. And 250 some thousand pounds. So it's pretty significant.
Why do you feel like it's important for organizations like Trellis to contribute produce to local food banks and other kinds of food assistance programs?
Well, I mean, there continues to be a tremendous demand, right? So I guess there's a couple of answers to your question. One is, as I've mentioned, a lot of these, especially sort of post-industrial urban clusters of like Phoenixville and Pottstown, that just don't have as ready access to grocery stores. Particularly Pottstown is a good example, but there's other areas. And even sometimes when people do have access, right, they either can't afford what's there, they generally can't afford or don't buy the organic produce. And that produce is coming from far away, right? Which has a couple of negative impacts. It has a negative environmental impact from the carbon footprint of either being shipped from another country or, flown or through train, hundreds of miles and hundreds of thousands of miles sometimes. So it is not the healthiest way on multiple levels, because when you're traveling that far of a distance, the nutritional content of the food is lower. So, and you don't know what kind of farming practices were used. There's a whole host of reasons why that isn't the best option. So one of the things that we feel is an incredibly important impact of our program is that you are basically taking the most nutritious food possible, right? Locally grown organic produce, and bringing it to individuals that have sometimes some of the worst health outcomes, right? The greatest health disparities. So this is an equity opportunity, right? To bring some of this, the best, to those that need it the most. So that's a big factor. And I think the other piece of it is just an opportunity to have people engage in a distributed way, right? This concept of what I tend to call distributed growing systems. Okay, so some of the work, and I'll segue just a little bit, Stephanie, to our work in Pottstown, because we're doing some work there, just trying to get as much growing going on in Pottstown as possible, both through gardens as well as hydroponic systems, so like grow towers and things like that indoors that you can grow all year long. And just that the idea that we have a lot of land that's not used, and we have a lot of spaces that are not used. And if we could fill a lot of that with food, it would be healthier for people, better for the local economy. And, it's utilizing spaces that otherwise would sit empty, or sometimes not, if it's just vacant land or whatever, it contributes to erosion, it contributes to runoff. There's just so many positives to doing it this way. So I think it's really, there's so many levels of benefit in doing it this way, that it's just the role that I think we feel like we need to play in this space, because it's the expertise that we have, and the view that we bring. And, for me personally, as the executive director, I feel strongly about the idea of trying to create sustainable change, right? So we will unfortunately probably always need organizations that provide food to people who can't access it. But the more we can help people lead and feed themselves, and create these systems where we don't have to do that as much, and they can do it themselves or access it right there, or it's much lower cost, so on and so forth, better in our opinion.
Yeah, no, you definitely answered the question for sure. So, we've talked so much about Trellis and all the wonderful things Trellis is doing, but I would love to know, how did you get involved with Trellis to begin with? And, did you have a background in agriculture beforehand?
No, definitely did not have a background in agriculture, which is kind of funny. So I actually have a bit of a varied path. I spent about the first 9 years of my career working in financial services and investments, which was a phenomenal foundation and a great experience. But I sort of got to that point, and I really wanted to do something a little more humanistic and connected to people. And I ended up going back to school and getting my master's in public health from Drexel University, which led to a path of working in health-focused nonprofits, but still actually more on the business side of them. So I did a lot of work in sort of strategic planning, financial management, small organization turnaround, kind of nonprofit organization turnaround type situations. I also worked to run a wellness and prevention focused nonprofit down in West and Southwest Philadelphia. That was a consortium of care for and underinsured residents. So for a number of years. And after that, I started to sort of take a little bit of a turn into looking at climate change and sustainability, and actually co-founded a company in 2010 called Sastrana, and we did sustainability consultancy work with large corporates and small and medium-sized businesses as well, and ultimately built an enterprise-level software system to help organizations to assess their environmental and social impacts and try to help manage those and improve them as an organization. And I did that work until about 2018, when I think we kind of got tired of sort of beating our heads against a wall that wasn't quite ready to move yet. And
Yeah.
so at that point, I had been connected with a previous executive director at what was, as I said, Triskelis, and was then becoming Trellis for Tomorrow. And I knew that this opportunity was out there. So it was very appealing to me because it was working with young people. In the previous 10 years that I had been working on sustainability and climate change, one of the biggest concerns that I had was just the limited propensity for change in sort of the current leadership within particularly corporations, but large organizations, and a lot of that is sort of built into the system. But I started thinking about how do we change that dynamic? How do we change that paradigm and have people really thinking innovatively about sustainable living from a younger age? So that was appealing to me. And as a public health professional, the idea of thinking about nutrition and health and diet and food, which is, as you said, sort of the crux of everything in a lot of ways. So the combination of those two things at Trellis was really, really appealing. And I knew that my background in helping to manage nonprofits, small nonprofits, would really be useful. So it sort of just tied everything together for me.
Yeah. I feel like, doing this podcast, we've heard so many different stories about how, women end up in ag, some of them being born in it, some of them never even considering it as
Yeah.
a career path. So
Mhm.
I love hearing everyone's story of how they kind of make their way into this industry.
Yeah, yeah. I love the stories, and I do find exactly like you. There's just some really interesting pathways that people come to
Mhm.
this work, and that's part of the beauty of the tapestry of it.
Mhm. Yeah, that actually leads so perfectly into our final question, which is, what does being a woman in ag mean to you?
To be completely honest, I don't know that I've ever thought about anything in my life in terms of what does it mean to be a woman in X, Y, or Z. Like
Mhm.
I think I'm just grateful. I think I'm just grateful to be able to learn the things that I'm learning, to be working with the kind of people that I work with that are so passionate and dedicated to making change and excited about what the possibilities are. Super smart, really incredibly smart and creative and um, just dedicated individuals. And so I think I would just say that maybe not so much as a woman, but just as a human and as somebody walking this earth with lots of other people, just trying to figure out how to make a difference, but just to be the best person you can be. I just feel grateful that this opportunity existed, and that an organization like Trellis is out there, and I had the opportunity to get involved in it.
Yeah, I love that answer. All right. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for joining me at the farmhouse today. It was so great talking to you.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity and for the work that you do to promote all of the good work that's happening out there in this incredibly important space that is needs a lot of, growth and change and evolution. So thank you.
It was so great talking to Jennifer today. I really loved hearing all the stuff that she's doing at Trellis for Tomorrow. It seems like a really, really cool organization. And I feel like, that age group of that, 12 to 18 that's doing the Seed Skills program, what an awesome age to really get kids involved in ag and to teach them that hard work and the work ethic and just the process of growing food. I mean, that's such a important age to be learning something like that. And I feel like I was a little older than that the first time I worked on a farm. I was, I think, about 18, turning 19. It was the summer after my freshman year of college. I worked on a dairy farm in Lebanon County for that summer, and I helped milk the cows and clean out the barn. And, it was a really great experience. It was the first time I worked on a farm. I definitely was not an early bird at all. And so getting up and having to be there by like 6 a.m. or whatever it was to get the milking going was definitely a struggle for me, but it was something that taught me some really valuable skills. So I just I love that Trellis is taking these young people who don't have those opportunities really to get involved in ag and giving them those hands-on skills. So very, very cool. And now I feel like really inspired to, we always joke here at Lancaster Farming that we need to have a Lancaster Farming farm and like grow some things. And I'm like, maybe we actually should start growing some stuff here. So I don't know. Steve, if you're listening, Steve is our editor, my boss, and Justin, our president. If you guys are listening to this, which I hope you are, maybe it's time that we should get our garden going, just saying. So anyway, next week, I will be very happy to have Candace back here at the farmhouse with us. She is on vacation as we're recording this episode right now, but she will be back for the episode we release next week, which I'm excited to have her back. But thank you all so much for listening. If you like this episode, please consider subscribing if you haven't already done so. And if you really like this episode, please consider leaving us a review. If you have any questions or thoughts about this episode or the podcast in general, you can email us at farmhouse@lancasterfarming.com. You can also find us on a bunch of different social media platforms at Lancaster Farming. And thank you so much again for listening and for visiting us here at the farmhouse. I'm Stephanie. Candace again will be back next week, and we will talk to you later. Bye. This episode of The Farmhouse is copyright 2024 by Lancaster Farming Newspaper, part of the Steinman Communications family.
It was written by Stephanie Spiker and Candace Wierzbowski. It was produced by Eric Herlock and Matt Lee. The music you've heard throughout this show is courtesy of Tin Bird Shadow.